This is what we're going to see are really our basic things that we're going to set up for a short-term trip. So what I'm looking at the top is my trip name, and we always recommend give your trip a name that makes sense to people that are going on the trip, but also something that you can come back and reference in the future. So we see a lot of organizations that'll put, say, Kenya student trip summer 2020, and that way you know that it's for students, so they can identify with it, but then you also see the date stamp that's in there. And then you're going to choose the opportunity type. The majority of types are always going to almost always be fixed date. An ongoing trip type basically means really think about this in terms of like a mission hospital, and basically saying like our doors are open anytime you want to come, just apply. And then if you apply, then we're going to find a date for you, and then essentially that person or that family is going to be moved over to a fixed date trip. And then simple registration, all that does is it doesn't require the user to have an account. We're just asking for their name and email address to get them signed up. This is really good for, say, serving an hour at a soup kitchen locally. So then as I continue to look through, I have a start date for when the trip begins and when it ends. The time doesn't matter as much if it's a trip. It really matters if it's one of these simple registration local serving events. Then you're going to choose your time zone. That's going to default to the time zone of your organization. And then you have a number of date fields here. So when do you want to make it available? When do you want registration to start? And then when do you want when you want your deadline for registration? And the way that might work is you might be loading a bunch of trips, but you want them all to go live on, say, a kickoff event date. And then maybe a month later, you want all of your registrations to go live. So you have control over those dates for when things populate. There's a description field, and this is a open text area that you can drop in really whatever you want. But here's some tips that we've given you. Just think about, make sure that you're giving people the information that they need to understand, like, what's this trip all about? Why would I want to sign up for it? And really give some strong calls to action there. Custom categories, this is something else we'll talk about in another area, but as an organization, you can create your own custom categories and select which of those this specific trip would apply to. If you want to load any custom terms and conditions, you would select this and then add in any text. And this would be something that when someone applies for this trip, that they would have to check a box to say, yes, I agree to these terms and conditions. A little further down, we see privacy. And this, the two key questions. The first is, where does it appear? And it's going to ask, is this for your organization only? Is it for you and your partners, or is it private? Most organizations are going to choose my organization only. A private option would be good for, you might have a vision trip and you don't want this to be posted out on your wall of all the opportunities that you have available. Who can see the details of this trip? Most of the time you're going to do everyone. But there is the option for only people who are approved for the trip, and that primarily is working with restricted access trips where you don't want to have all the information listed. So it's going to have a trip ID page, and you can send the people that you want to apply for that trip a direct link to that page that has very little information. And then once they've been accepted, then they would be able to see the details on that trip. You can select to hide similar opportunities, and you can select to approve stories. So we always recommend, as a default, it's good to show similar opportunities, and then we recommend as a default that you probably want to take a look at stories before they go live. You can set your primary contact information, so who's the admin, their first name, last name, contact email, and then at the very bottom, you're going to choose the location. And the important thing about choosing a location, at least for the country, and then even more detail if you have it, but the location is going to be able to put a map pin in over here with your map for your short-term trip and your organization's profile.